And I don't know if that's good enough or not.
On October the 7th, you tweeted, "Give them hell, Netanyahu, enough is enough," and you got some blowback for that, as everybody who says anything about this. Were you surprised by the scale of the blowback? Do you wish you'd phrased that tweet differently? Do you have any regrets about it?
Well, you know, Twitter is a very complicated social media platform, and it's been difficult for me to learn how to use it wisely. And I'm not alone in that, because it's difficult to be wise on Twitter. Now, what I'm trying to learn is when a tweet is appropriate and when a long-form commentary is appropriate. And the rule, I think, is something like the higher the stakes, the more likely that the long-form commentary is necessary. And really, it would have been better had because I did release a YouTube video where I explained some of what we already talked about.
My sense
that, and that was received much better, let's put it that way, but it also gave me a chance to elaborate my argument. And so what it highlighted for me, and I felt, you know, I was very taken aback by what happened in Israel. And I was also appalled because in my estimation it was unnecessary. As I said, the Abraham Accords could have been extended earlier, and maybe this wouldn't have been necessary. And so I allowed myself to express some sentiment at that point without providing context, and that wasn't as good as providing the context. And I'm rethinking Twitter overall at the moment about how to use it. You know, Elon has taken off the character limit, and he's also made it possible to distribute video, and so it no longer has to be a place where impulsive exchanges can occur rapidly, and I'm trying to reconfigure how I use it. I'm much happier with the video. Now, you know, I was upset because I had developed somewhat of a Muslim following on YouTube, and I was very happy about that. A lot of people on the Islamic side of the world were watching my biblical lectures, for example, and you know, and I've had extensive conversations with Muslims on my YouTube channel, and you know, I burnt some of that up, and I'm not sure I did that. Well, I would say I'm certain I didn't do that in the most productive manner. And so, do I regret it? It would have been better to do the long form, to have done the long form to begin with, you know? And Twitter invites and rewards a certain amount of impulsivity, and it wasn't, I don't know, Pearce, I don't know if it's ever time for impulsive action, especially when the stakes are serious, you know?
There's no doubt, for example, that what happened on October the 7th was a form of hell for the victims and for their families. There's also no doubt that for many living in Gaza, for many innocent Palestinians, as we know, of the 2 million or so residents and citizens there, I think it's more than half are of child age, and many are very young children, and many children are getting killed. And as a father, I'm sure as like me, as a father, it is utterly heartbreaking to see so many thousands of children being killed who have nothing obviously to do with this. Again, this comes back to this moral quandary I have. You know, it's interesting when you said enough is enough in that tweet. You know, some people are already saying, even if they're very sympathetic to Israel's need to take out Hamas, they're looking at these fairly apocalyptic scenes in Gaza and thinking, enough is enough of that. You know, in other words, the revenge is already far greater in terms of death toll than the original appalling terror attacks. That, again, is where I have a moral quandary.
Well, the question is, I suppose, and I don't have an answer to this, is the most effective way of combating Hamas military? And part of the answer to that is the military eradication of Hamas even possible? Because as I said, and we can see it unfolding in real time, as Israel's more successful, militarily and the casualties mount, the resistance to what they're doing is going to grow.
Yeah.
And so even if they could take out Hamas militarily, which isn't obvious given its interpenetration with the civilian population, all of what's going to be played out is going to be played out on the military front. And we can see that in the rising tide, let's say, of demonstrations around the Western world. And I would say those demonstrations are likely to get larger and more effective in precise proportion to Israel's success on the military side. And so then I would think, well, is there another way of restraining Hamas? And well, that brings us back to the Abraham Accords, because they were the most promising thing that's happened in 7 decades. You know, and I think it's easy to underestimate what a miracle they were. The people who formulated the Abraham Accords had to fight the State Department. They tried to introduce it under Obama to begin with, right? The notion was, well, maybe we could start the peace process with Israel without putting the Palestinians first. And that had been off the table conceptually in the State Department, as far as I've been informed, forever. And then it was proposed during the Obama era and it was rejected. And then it was proposed during the beginning of the Trump era and rejected, but eventually they carried the day. And then they did do an end run. And I think that was actually good for the typical Palestinian, because it put a tremendous amount of pressure on the Palestinian authorities, who are basically tyrants, who are more than willing to use their own citizens as cannon fodder. It put a lot of pressure on them to actually do something moving towards a genuine peace, which is why now that's why Iran is so desperate to scuttle the Accords, I think.
Of course.
You know? So I think the way through Hamas, all things considered in the medium to long run, is to desperately extend the Abraham Accords as rapidly as possible. That's not a military victory, but you know, it's easy to do this from the armchair.
When you look at the full history of this conflict, the 7 decades of conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, Jonathan Friedland is a very good, respected Jewish journalist for The Guardian in the UK. He wrote a very interesting column the other day saying, you know, you could argue that both sides have a just cause here. And he said that as a leading Jewish commentator, that historically both sides have a just cause, and that it's important to remember that. And that's why passions run so high. It's why people care so much. And it's why racing to take sides is a mistake in this conflict. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that, you know, if there wasn't a lot to be said on both sides, then the conflict wouldn't drag on forever and be unresolvable. You know, I think at some point you do something like cut the Gordian knot, which I do think to some degree the Abraham Accords had begun to do. You know, I don't think Israel's going away, but I don't think the Palestine isn't going away either. And so those things have to be accepted. It looks to me like they have to be accepted as on the ground realities. Now, the problem I've seen continually, I don't know, is that it's been convenient to use the Palestinians as an irritant to Israel in the West. And so the Palestinians have been held hostage. You know, the people who portray them as innocent victims presume that the Palestinians have been held hostage by the Jews, let's say. But I would say the Palestinians have been held hostage even more effectively by their own leadership and by those who are perfectly willing to use them as the front man, the expendable front man to irritate Israel in the West. Well, you can't get peace under those circumstances, you know, and so Palestine is a reality that isn't going to go away, and Israel's a reality that isn't going to go away. And the Abraham Accords started to recognize that, and there was move in the right direction. And if that falls apart, we're going to be back to where we were 15 years ago, except worse.